Namaste, everyone. As you can see, I'm standing here in the library of our ashram instead of sitting in the studio downstairs where most of my videos are recorded. I'm in the library today because I want to show you some books that I read a long time ago, books that were really significant for me on my spiritual journey, books that actually changed my life. The books back here are on Western philosophy and psychology. Here's the first book I want to show you. It's The Story of Philosophy by Will Durant, who was a highly respected American philosopher and historian. I read this book in the 1970s when I was a young computer engineer and just beginning my spiritual journey. In college, I had studied lots of math and science, but I never took any courses in philosophy or history. So I wondered if any of the great philosophers of the Western world could show me how to find inner peace and perfect contentment in life. This book gave me a really good introduction to many great philosophers, from Plato and Aristotle to European philosophers like Kant and Schopenhauer, and up to relatively modern philosophers, including William James and Bertrand Russell. For the very first time in my life, I was exposed to this huge and amazing body of philosophical wisdom. It all seemed quite fascinating to me at first, but I didn't find what I was looking for. I didn't find any clear, straightforward teachings that could show me how to find perfect peace and contentment. Several years later, I wondered if I had overlooked some important teachings that were not included in that book. So I got this huge encyclopedia on philosophy, which has about 4,000 pages in 4 big volumes like this one. I spent months reading every single article in alphabetical order, from the 12th century theologian Abelard all the way to Zoroastrianism. A lot of that study was quite tedious, as you can imagine, but it seemed really necessary to me at the time. Anyway, after reading hundreds of entries that summarized 2,500 years of philosophical wisdom, I failed to find what I was looking for. Here's a very different kind of book on philosophy. It was written by Hermann Hesse, who actually won a Nobel Prize in Literature for this book in 1946. Magister Ludi is a fictional story about a group of scholarly monks who lived somewhere in Europe. They belonged to a monastic order whose purpose was to fully synthesize the wisdom of all the arts, sciences, and philosophies in the world through a highly sophisticated mental exercise that they called the glass bead game. Western monks who pursue wisdom. You can understand why this book attracted me so strongly, even though it's a work of fiction. Just behind me are books on Western religions and Christian mysticism. When I first began my spiritual journey, I didn't know a thing about the great Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart and St. John of the Cross. I was raised in a Roman Catholic family, and I had received 8 years of formal religious instruction in school, but no one ever taught me about Christian mysticism, probably because it existed on the fringes of the church, far away from mainstream practices. Instead of being based on religious doctrines, it's mostly based on personal spiritual experiences that come through intense prayer and deep meditation. Meister Eckhart was a 14th century German priest and theologian who was actually branded as a heretic back then for making a distinction between God and Godhead. His description of Godhead sounds almost like Adi Shankara's descriptions of Brahman. Listen to this. The Godhead is a silent desert into which no distinction ever peeped, no distinction of Father, Son, or Holy Ghost. Therefore, I pray to God to make me free of God, for my real being is above God. Saint John of the Cross was a 16th century Spanish monk who wrote wonderful devotional poems that sound to me like those of great Hindu saints like Mirabai and Kabir. Who knows, if I had learned about these amazing mystics when I was still a child, maybe I would have grown up to be a Christian monk instead of a Hindu sannyasi. In modern times, many Christian monks have been strongly attracted to the teachings of Vedanta. You might have heard of Thomas Merton, an American monk and author who was deeply influenced by Hindu and Buddhist teachings. In this book, Merton writes about his spiritual experiences during his travels in India, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. This book was written by a French priest who lived much of his life in India as a monk, and he took the name Swami Abhishektananda. He developed a unique teaching that related the Holy Trinity of the Christian tradition to Sat Chit Ananda, 3 words that describe Atma, the true self. I discovered these books on Christian mysticism only after my formal study of Advaita Vedanta had already begun. Reading them inspired me to dive even deeper into my own studies and practice. Back here are books on Sanskrit language, grammar books, dictionaries, and works of literature like the poetry of Kalidasa. I spent several years studying this book. It's called Deva Vani Praveshika, an introduction to the language of the gods. It was written by Robert Goldman, a professor at the University of California in Berkeley. I started learning Sanskrit in 1981 using a pre-publication typewritten manuscript of this book that I got from my first Sanskrit teacher, who had studied with Dr. Goldman. It took me many years to learn Sanskrit thoroughly. I struggled a lot, but I'm so glad that my guru made me and all his students learn Sanskrit, because as I eventually came to discover, scriptures and texts in the original Sanskrit language are so much more clear than even the best translations. Over here are books on Hindu culture and Indian history. This book is Gandhi's personal autobiography. He called it My Experiments with Truth, and it shows how his life was entirely focused on spiritual growth. All of his political activities were actually part of his practice of karma yoga. He constantly strived to follow the path of truth and dharma. He famously said, "Truth is my God, and nonviolence is the means to realize him." I probably learned more about karma yoga from this book than from anywhere else other than my own guru. And this little book is one of my favorites. It's a famous collection of devotional poems by Rabindranath Tagore called Gitanjali. Tagore won a Nobel Prize in Literature for it. This book happens to be a first edition that was printed in 1914, and I've read it so many times that it's falling apart. Here are the opening lines. Thou hast made me endless, such is thy pleasure. This frail vessel thou emptiest again and again, and fillest it ever with fresh life. This little flute of a reed thou hast carried over hills and dales, and hast breathed through it melodies eternally new. At the immortal touch of thy hands, my little heart loses its limits in joy and gives birth to utterance ineffable. To utterance ineffable. Wow. Just wow. Here is the rest of our library. There are also many more books upstairs in my room, mostly Sanskrit texts and commentaries that I need to refer to from time to time. Up here are the 4 Vedas with various commentaries, and below are books on Indian philosophy. When I first began to study Advaita Vedanta, I was really confused about how it was related to all the other religious and spiritual teachings that evolved from the Vedas. I got this set of books on the history of Indian philosophy, which was extremely helpful for me. It was written by Surendranath Dasgupta, who was a great Sanskrit scholar from Bengal. He studied hundreds of original Sanskrit scriptures to compile this history. It was his life's work. The first volume was published in 1922, and the last one in 1952, just before he died. In the first volume, he explains the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the main philosophical schools like Nyaya, Sankhya, and Vedanta. In the remaining volumes, he explains the teachings of the Yoga Vasishta, the Bhagavad Gita, and all the major devotional philosophies, including the teachings of Ramanuja, Madhva, and Chaitanya. I referred to these books again and again whenever my studies led me to teachings that lied beyond the more familiar teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Down here are the Upanishads, the source texts on which Advaita Vedanta is based. Before I knew Sanskrit well enough, I spent a lot of time studying this set of 8 Upanishads with Shankara's commentaries, translated by Swami Gambhirananda of the Ramakrishna Mission. His translations are quite accurate, and they're surprisingly clear, in spite of the scholarly nature of Shankara's commentaries. Up here are many editions of the Bhagavad Gita with various commentaries. For me, the most important commentary of all is that of my own guru, Puja Swami Dayananda. At his ashram in Pennsylvania, he spent 2 years teaching us all 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, some of it with Shankara's commentaries. All of those classes were recorded and transcribed. Then later, they were carefully edited and published as the Bhagavad Gita Home Study Program in big binders like this one, with about 4,000 pages altogether. Eventually, all that material was nicely printed in 9 nice volumes. Before studying at his ashram, I had read several translations of the Bhagavad Gita with explanations by various teachers. I thought I understood the Gita fairly well, but during our course, I came to appreciate how little I actually understood from the books I read before. The fact is, scriptures need to be studied with the help of a qualified teacher, someone who can not only skillfully unfold the profound spiritual wisdom contained in those texts, but also who can make that wisdom completely relevant to your own life and experience. Below are works by Shankara and other important texts on Advaita Vedanta, like the Brahma Sutras. All of these books are also on Advaita Vedanta. These little books on Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Karma Yoga actually introduced me to Advaita Vedanta in the late 1970s. They were written by Swami Vivekananda, who was the foremost disciple of Sri Ramakrishna and the founder of the Ramakrishna Mission. Reading Swami Vivekananda's books today, I can see that he never had the opportunity to undergo the traditional study of Advaita Vedanta as taught by Shankara. And as a result, there are many little technical shortcomings in his books. But they're so well written and inspiring that they're a great place to begin. Those books led me to a Ramakrishna ashram in Santa Barbara, California, where I went every Sunday morning to attend lectures given by monks from the Ramakrishna Mission. Those lectures guided my spiritual practice until I met Puja Swami Dayananda in 1981. Now, all the books right behind me are written by contemporary spiritual teachers, ranging from J. Krishnamurti to Sri Aurobindo, and from Nisargadatta Maharaj to Osho Rajneesh, and also from Paramahamsa Yogananda to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and a whole lot more. So many of these books were tremendously helpful for me at the beginning of my spiritual journey. As my studies progressed, I gradually came to understand their limitations. These books were like stepping stones I could use to cross a stream. When you reach the far side of a stream, the stepping stones are left behind. And when I reached the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, all these books also got left behind. Now, let me briefly show you the rest of the library before we finish. Over here are books on yoga and meditation. Many of them are on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is the main text for the practice of meditation. I studied it along with its commentaries quite extensively, and that helped deepen my own practice of meditation. Down here are books on Tantra and Buddhism, and up here are the great epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, and also the main Puranas, such as the Bhagavata Purana. In addition to the original Sanskrit texts, there are translations both in Hindi and English. Over here are books on bhakti, devotional practices like puja, and lots of Sanskrit prayer books, including prayers from the Vedas, from the Puranas, and from other scriptures. This book is called Mantra Pushpam, and it contains most of the Vedic hymns that we used to chant regularly at the ashram during our residential course. I still chant those hymns sometimes before my usual practice of meditation. I'll leave links to each of the books I've shown you in the description below. I hope this video inspires you to read more as part of your spiritual practice. Printed books are rapidly falling out of favor nowadays, since so much electronic material is easily available online. But there's something very special about sitting down in a quiet place with a favorite book in your lap, especially when it leads your spiritual journey to the next step, and the next, and the next. Then, after you're done reading, you can close the book and close your eyes and then meditate on what you've just read.